This man, deeply in debt and in desperation, conspired with his father to claim the entire 500 million won insurance payout. Unbeknownst to him, this scheme would cost 7 lives. What happened to his plan? Who will ultimately benefit? Watch this amazing film to find out. A man is tied up inside an abandoned building, while another man pours gasoline everywhere and then sets the building on fire. Unexpectedly, the flames erupt violently, spiraling out of control, engulfing the entire building like a torch. Soon after, firefighters arrive at the scene and discover a severely burned man. Fortunately, he is still alive. He is quickly taken to the emergency room where, thanks to the doctor's efforts, he is saved, though his body is almost completely destroyed by the fire. When the man regained consciousness, the doctors asked for his name, but when he revealed it, Dr. Duan was completely surprised. The man's name was Parng, a name that had kept her awake for years. It turned out there was an irreconcilable feud between them. 15 days earlier, Ian had borrowed 130 million won from the public to invest in the stock market. However, the stocks he bought had plummeted in value, leaving Dion completely penniless and unable to repay the gangsters. He was arrested, taken to their base, and subjected to surgery. The gangster boss then declared that if he didn't have the money, his body would belong to him. The boss then gave Dion 30 days. If he didn't pay the full amount before the deadline, he would have to bear the consequences himself. After that, Ian was thrown out onto the street. Despite still being very tired, Ji-ong had to go to work early the next morning with hope, hoping to earn enough money to pay off his debts. That morning, while working, he accidentally discovered something shocking. A Chinese employee had been fired by the manager. Unexpectedly, the employee had directly pulled out a knife and threatened the manager, saying that if the manager didn't let him continue working, he would take a knife from the employee. As a result, the manager was so frightened that he didn't dare fire the employee anymore. Seeing this, Ji-ong tried searching for the employee's tattoo online. To his surprise, he discovered that the man was a real gangster, a member of the Triad. At that moment, Ji-ong received a call from his father, who had just been in an accident and was in the emergency room. Ji-ong immediately went to the hospital to visit him, but as soon as he entered the room, a man appeared. The man directly told Ji-ong to go outside to talk, admitting to causing the accident. Fortunately, Ji-ong's father was there. Ong was seriously injured, so the driver wanted the two parties to settle the matter amicably without involving the authorities. After saying this, the driver took out 5 million won and gave it to Jae-ong, hoping he would agree to his request. Although Jae-ong had the money in hand, he refused. Balkan went inside to ask his father's opinion. Surprisingly, Jae-ong took 2 million out of 5 million, giving only 3 million to his father. Then he lied, saying the person who caused the accident was poor and begged them not to call the police. Hearing this, his father agreed not to pursue the matter further. Then Rae-ong went outside and told the driver that everything was fine. However, during the conversation, he smelled alcohol on the driver, which gave Rae-ong another reason to demand an additional 3 million. Although the driver was reluctant, he had no other choice. Finally, he reluctantly gave Rae-ong the last 3 million, which made him extremely happy and self-satisfied, thinking that making money was easy. Afterwards, he went home to get some things for his father, who was in the hospital, and also checked to see if his father had any valuable items that could be sold. The result? Ong found a watch, but the biggest surprise was an insurance policy. Inside, it stated that if his father died in an accident, he would receive 500 million in insurance money. Reading this, he couldn't help but sigh, wondering if it would have been better if the driver had hit him a little harder. He then went to the hospital, but as soon as he reached the alley near his house, he was stopped by a group of thugs trying to extort money from him. When he refused, they immediately attacked him, punching and kicking him, leaving him defenseless. They then searched his belongings, found his watch and tried to take it, but Ong held on tight. Unable to take it, the thugs left, leaving Ong lying motionless on the ground. When he woke up, 3 days had passed. It turned out that a patrol officer had found him and taken him to the hospital. However, they couldn't find the culprit because there were no security cameras in that alley. Ji-ong didn't find the thugs, but he wasn't discouraged because he had just come up with a new way to make money. So right after being discharged from the hospital, he went to the scrap yard where the Chinese employee lived. Without beating around the bush, Ji immediately made an offer to him. He would receive 60 million won for eliminating someone. Hearing this, the Chinese employee asked who the target was, and Ji frankly said, "My father. You just need to cause an accident with your car. The location is the alley near your house." This alley had no cameras, so there was no fear of being caught. He said that if the man completed the task, he would receive 200 million won, and the man would receive 30%, or 60 million won. To avoid being exposed, the two agreed not to meet until the job was done. But less than 24 hours later, the employee went to see. He overheard that the insurance money from ION wasn't 200 million won, but 500 million, so the amount he received from this deal must be at least 150 million. If Ji-ong didn't agree, he wouldn't do it anymore. At this point, Ji-ong had no choice but to agree. That night, he invited a colleague to dinner, and after dinner, he went to karaoke alone. He did this for only one purpose: to create an alibi. At the same time, his father was on his way home when, upon entering an alley, he was hit from behind by a car. The person who got out of the car was none other than the Chinese employee. The next day, the police called Ji-ong, saying that his father had passed away and that he should go to the hospital immediately. Hearing this, Jiang was overjoyed, and to avoid detection he even practiced crying in the bathroom. When he finally admitted that his father had died, he staged a scene to deceive the police, pretending to be extremely grief-stricken over the death of the most important person in his life. The police then declared that his father had died in a traffic accident. However, they suspected it wasn't a normal accident and that someone had deliberately staged it because a witness had seen the driver hit him. They deliberately reversed the car to hit him again. So they needed to investigate further. Hearing this, Jiang's joy completely vanished. He then said that his father had lived a gentle life, never making enemies, so how could someone do such a thing to him? It must have been an accident. At this point, the police revealed a crucial detail. When his father was found on the mountain, someone had deliberately buried him to destroy evidence. Therefore, this was no longer simply an accident. Hearing this, Jiang completely broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, not because of his father's death but because of the risk of not receiving the insurance money. Going back to the previous night, at the time of the accident, a couple was having dinner at a restaurant. The man was Sang Ho-an, a famous traditional Chinese medicine doctor, and he was having dinner with his girlfriend Ro Dung. After dinner, the two returned to Sang Ho-an's apartment, where they shared a romantic moment. But at midnight, the girl received terrible news. The father of a relative had passed away, forcing her to return immediately. With no other choice, Du Dung asked her boyfriend to drive her home. However, instead of focusing on driving, they engaged in inappropriate behavior, resulting in an accident. Upon checking, they were shocked to discover the other person had died. Terrified, Du Dung broke down and tried to call the police, but her boyfriend quickly snatched the phone and stopped her. If this came to light, they would both go to jail. Just then, another car approached, forcing them to quickly hide the body. Only after that car drove away could they get the body into their own car, intending to bury it so no one would know about their crime. They were surprised to find someone had seen them when they returned. The man, visibly terrified, pretended not to see anything and cycled away. However, Sang Ho-an didn't hesitate and immediately chased after him. Despite his best efforts, the man was eventually caught. However, he lost consciousness when the car crashed. Sang Ho-an quickly stuffed the man into the trunk of his car and drove up the mountain to find a burial place. However, the bumpy road woke the man up, and he immediately started shouting for help, forcing Sang Ho-an to stop the car and teach him a lesson. He threatened to bury him alive if he continued shouting. At this point, the witness said he would remain silent and pretend nothing had happened, as long as Sang Ho-an spared him. Surprisingly, Sang Ho-an then gave him 10 million yen, which he accepted, making himself an accomplice. He also stated that if he dared reveal anything, he would not escape responsibility. Afterward, the two of them dug a hole and buried the body. By the time they finished, it was almost dawn and they had to leave quickly before anyone saw them. They were unaware that a dog had seen them as they left. The next morning, a girl walking on the mountain saw the dog digging a hole. Curious, she went to investigate and found. Indeed, she discovered a body at the bottom of the pit. And this is why Jiang's father was found on the mountain. Meanwhile, upon returning home, Jiang didn't forget to remove the memory card from the car and throw it away before taking it for repairs to erase all traces. However, he didn't know that his every action was being monitored by two people. At the same time, Jiang was also questioned by the police about what he did and where he was on the night of the accident. He said he went out to eat with friends, then went to karaoke, and finally he went to a fast food restaurant in the city. Hearing this, the police officer verified Jiang's statement and found it completely accurate, but he still felt that Jiang wasn't acting normally, so he secretly followed him. Meanwhile, Jiang went to the insurance company to inquire about the 500 million won he was entitled to, but the staff told him to wait. He had to wait for half the morning before he was invited to a meeting. At this point, the insurance company owner frankly stated that they couldn't disperse the money because the police were still investigating. They feared his father wasn't killed in an accident but was murdered. Thinking about not getting the money, Jiang became furious, but it was no use. He ended up leaving empty-handed. With only 16 days left until the repayment deadline, Jiang was extremely worried, not only lacking money but also desperate. Upon returning to the funeral home, the staff even demanded payment for the funeral expenses. Having no other choice, he gave them all the donation money. Worse still, the Chinese staff member appeared, declaring his task complete and that it was time for Jiang to pay him. Instead of paying, Jiang berated him, accusing him of causing the accident and then burying the body in the mountains. At this point, the staff member explained why his father was still alive after the initial collision, forcing him to pay. The second time, however, his father was no longer alive, so he still had to pay, but Jiang refused to pay, resulting in him being beaten up by the other party. Not only that, the employee then played a recording of their conversation, after which he said that if the money wasn't paid within a week, he would turn himself in. After saying this, the employee left Yang. However, he didn't know that a police officer had witnessed the entire incident from a distance. The officer immediately followed the employee. Surprisingly, with the instincts of a killer, the Chinese officer sensed he was being followed. After walking a short distance further, he intercepted the officer, used the excuse of borrowing a lighter to get closer, and then seized the opportunity to kill the officer. Seeing his opponent dead, the officer checked his identification and discovered he was a police officer. Unfortunately, his entire actions had been recorded by security cameras. Knowing he would be caught sooner or later, he immediately called Jiang, saying that he had just attacked a police officer and demanding that Jiang pay him tomorrow so he could escape, otherwise Jiang would be taken to meet his father. Knowing the other party wouldn't say anything, he remained silent. Joking but lacking the money to pay, Jiang decided to take a big gamble. He grabbed a hammer intending to avenge his father. Meanwhile, the situation at the Wen family's house was far from peaceful. The witness from that day came to see him again, saying he had gone home to reconsider, as it was a serious matter, but 10 million yen was too little, so they demanded 30 million yen. Cornered, Mr. On reluctantly agreed but said he wouldn't have the money for the next few days. Hearing this, the man happily left. Just then the garage called him, so he went to pick up his car after it was repaired. When he arrived, they asked him why the car was broken. Sang Ho-on could only lie, saying he had hit a deer, but the mechanic said that wasn't right. If he had hit something, the front of the car should have been damaged. However, his windshield was broken, which meant something had fallen on it. Sang Ho-on seemed to understand something. He hurriedly ran to the trash can and searched for the memory card. Luckily, he found it and brought it back to check. The results showed that the man had indeed fallen from the bridge. But the most surprising thing was that the real witness was actually on the bridge at that time. Sang Ho-on now realized he had been tricked, so he called his girlfriend and told her everything. Furthermore, the two then arranged to meet. Sang Ho-on showed his girlfriend the video and pictures of the man. His girlfriend then asked what he intended to do, and Sang Ho-on replied that he would report the incident, asserting that he was not responsible. Surprisingly, his girlfriend then asked why the man waited for their car to pass before throwing the object down. After some thought, Sang Ho-on realized the problem. It was none other than this girl who had betrayed him. She had conspired with the other man to harm him. Enraged, he decided to. They confronted her immediately, but at that moment a witness opened the car door and stepped in, using a piece of cloth to cover Sang Ho-on's nose. After knocking him unconscious, the two planned to dispose of Sang Ho-on's body. They drove to an abandoned house in the mountains, immediately got out of the car and began digging a hole. Unexpectedly, Sang Ho-on woke up at that moment. Enraged at being tricked, he decided to confront them. He drove straight towards them, however the man managed to dodge, but the woman was hit by the car. Only when Sang Ho-on got out of the car did he realize the witness was still alive. He tried to beg for mercy, promising to pay any price, but they didn't care and simply dealt with Sang Ho-on without hesitation. However, the man never suspected that Sang Ho-on was being followed by two strangers who had filmed his crime. Meanwhile, Dr. Duong contacted a detective agency, spending a large sum of money to investigate the identities of the three people. Upon leaving the detective agency, she encountered the couple who had filmed the crime scene at the house. In the abandoned building, it turned out they were detectives hired to follow someone to Ho-on's place. Thanks to his extensive connections, the detective quickly investigated the identities of the three men Ho-on requested. Through this, he also learned a shocking secret. The three men were the ones who had harmed Ho-on years ago, causing the doctor psychological trauma to this day. At this point, the detective also called Ho-on, saying that two of the three men had died, while Jae-ong was still alive and was a patient at the hospital where she worked. At this point, there was no doubt that the victim of the fire in the abandoned building was none other than Ho-ong's enemy. So she immediately went to his hospital room, but just then, two police officers arrived. They entered the room to question Ho-ong about what happened on the day of the fire and why he was there, but the police didn't know that this man wasn't Jeong, but Baeum-jun. He was a witness to the attack on Sang Ho-on. Facing police questioning, he recounted the events. That night, as he got into his car, he was suddenly attacked by a stranger. When he woke up, he found himself tied to a chair in an abandoned house, with two men fighting in front of him. When one of them won, he poured gasoline everywhere, then doused himself and set the house on fire. When he woke up again, he found himself in the hospital. The police said they would take his fingerprints for investigation. However, due to the severity of his burns, his fingerprints were completely destroyed, forcing the two officers to give up. As soon as the police left, the man felt unsafe and fled the hospital. Hearing this, Duan immediately chased after him. She caught him at the elevator door and asked if he recognized her. No, knowing the doctor had mistaken him for someone else but not wanting to attract attention, he simply pulled her into the elevator and removed his mask so Duong could see his face clearly. He said they were complete strangers because they had never met. Then he said that if she was looking for someone named Ji-ong, he no longer existed. The doctor was half believing, half doubting. She thought the severe burns had altered his face, and that he said those things out of fear of her revenge. Meanwhile, the man with the deep face remained completely unaware that the doctor was plotting to eliminate him. Only after leaving the hospital did he remember everything. That night, after burying the two bodies, he drove away. Soon after, the two detectives returned to the office to report. It turned out they had been hired by Sang-ho's wife to monitor her husband's infidelity, but they had inadvertently filmed the crime. Early the morning of the fire, Jiang called the Chinese agent promising to pay him when he arrived. However, Jiang had no intention of paying. He planned to silence the man that very night. That day, as the officer was preparing to meet Ji, Bayam-run unexpectedly appeared. It turned out the two had met in prison. After leaving, they had formed a team to do business together. On the day the officer was assigned to deal with Duan-ong's father, he called Om-run so they could work together. They waited until Daong's father entered the alley before striking. Unfortunately, Jiang's father didn't die immediately, forcing them to put him in the car. At this point, Bayam-run had an idea. He called Sang Hoan's girlfriend and they planned to shift all the blame onto him. When the couple's car arrived, he would throw the knife down, thus dragging Sang Hoan into the case. 6 hours before the fire, the police found the body of a colleague murdered by the Chinese officer. Checking security cameras, they also identified the culprit. When they entered his house, they found Wai Ong's father's file. At the same time, Ji Ong arrived at the meeting point to meet the employee who was away. He practiced his attack beforehand, estimating the whole process would only take about a minute. Unexpectedly, while he was engrossed in his practice, the other party knocked on the door, startling him and almost exposing him. Then the two drove off, but surprisingly, after a short distance, they encountered a police checkpoint. Fearing detection, the employee pulled his hat down to cover his face. In reality, the police were looking for Om-run, not him. Soon after, they drove to an abandoned house in the mountains. At this point, Ji Ong tried to negotiate with the other party, but the Chinese police officer refused. Now, all he wanted was money. With no other choice, Zhang got out of the car, opened the trunk to get the money, and returned to the car with the bag of cash. But when the other man opened it to check, he found it was full of papers. Meanwhile, Ji grabbed the hammer. However, just as he was about to strike, his opponent easily dodged it. It turned out that during training, this guy had figured out his plan. As a result, Ji was beaten up by the other party, then dragged into an abandoned house and tied to a chair. Bayam-jun was inside. At this point, the Chinese police officer suggested they deal with the man and escape together. However, Bayam-jun said they couldn't escape anymore because the area was completely sealed off. This was the crime scene where he committed the crime. At that moment, Bayam-jun looked directly at Do Wai-ong. He noticed that the two looked very similar. An idea immediately formed in his mind, and he unexpectedly attacked his teammate with a piece of broken glass, shocking the Chinese officer. After his teammate died, Bayam-jun poured gasoline everywhere. He decided to burn everything and escape under Ji's name, even swapping clothes with her. He also took the watch from her wrist, then immediately set it on fire, ignoring her cries for help. Unfortunately, the fire was much bigger than he imagined, and he was burned all over his body. However, he was lucky to survive and was taken to the hospital. Worst of all, Bayam-run impersonated Dr. Duan's enemy. When she chased after him, he was accidentally seen by a male colleague. During questioning, she recounted everything to him, and Duan said that from now on she wanted to finally have a good night's sleep. She then contacted a detective agency and asked for their help to sneak into the hospital's medicine cabinet and take a bottle of anesthetic. The next morning, Bayam-run received a call from the insurance company informing him that the insurance money left by Duan's father had been transferred to a local church. This enraged Bayam-run, and he immediately left home to go to church. Just outside the door, he bumped into the detective, who took the opportunity to exchange the bottle of anesthetic that Duan had given him. A short while later, Bayam-run arrived at the church and demanded that the nun return his money. However, the nun refused, and despite his efforts, no matter what he did that day, Bayam-run was completely helpless. As he turned to leave, he noticed Duan. He couldn't understand why she was there. It felt like she was watching him. So Bayam-run approached and confronted her, threatening to teach her a lesson if she didn't explain. But from beginning to end, Duan only observed him without saying a word. At that moment, the pain from his wound flared up again, causing Bayam-run to anxiously take out some painkillers. However, he didn't realize the bottle had been swapped, resulting in a terrible headache. This forced Bayam-run to try to go home. However, when he reached the alley, he sensed someone following him. Turning around, he saw On slowly approaching. At this point, Bayam-run could only admit he was the imposter, but he couldn't provide any evidence. He couldn't prove he had been assaulted. Ji-ong was truly harmed when the anesthetic took effect prematurely, causing him to stagger and fall to the ground. The doctor intended to take revenge, but her colleague unexpectedly appeared and stopped her. He told her she didn't need to sacrifice everything for this scoundrel. After all, she still had a bright future ahead of her. Hearing those words, Duan reconsidered and finally agreed to let go of her hatred. She didn't take his life but only gave him a few punches to vent her anger. Then she and her colleague got into a car to go home. But halfway there, her colleague received a phone call from a mob boss who wanted him to have urgent surgery. After dropping Duan off at home, he was picked up by a car. Upon arriving, he met the mob boss, and it turned out that he had been in a very difficult situation before. To pay for his tuition, he had secretly performed surgeries for the mob boss. This man was also Ji-ong's creditor. At this point, he said that he would only work for today and wouldn't do any more. Hearing this, the mob boss gave him a gift as a thank you and said that all agencies could use it. The ashes from today's surgery should be taken away. When the doctor entered the operating room, he was startled. The man tied to the bed was none other than Du-on's #1 enemy. He never expected that man to fall into his hands. With others, he would anesthetize them before proceeding, but with this man, he decided not to. Poor guy, he tried to use impersonation to escape punishment, but who would have thought that the person he impersonated was no better? And so he paid the price for his actions. After completing the work, the doctor went to her house to express his gratitude. He told her that she could finally sleep peacefully. That's where it ended. If you like this story, please give me a like and subscribe. He would have given them anesthesia before proceeding, but with this man, he decided not to. Poor guy, he tried to use impersonation to avoid punishment, but who would have thought the person he impersonated wasn't any better? And so he paid the price for his actions. After completing the procedure, the doctor came to her house to express his gratitude, telling her that she could finally sleep peacefully. That's where it ended. If you like this story, please give me a like and subscribe. He would have given them anesthesia before proceeding, but with this man, he decided not to. Poor guy, he tried to use impersonation to avoid punishment, but who would have thought the person he impersonated wasn't any better? And so he paid the price for his actions. After completing the procedure, the doctor came to her house to express his gratitude, telling her that she could finally sleep peacefully. That's where it ended. If you liked this story, please give me a like and subscribe.